Hello friends, the time has come to conclude the rereading Harry Potter in my 30s series. Today we are wrapping it all up with Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. This is quite a moment for me. I rarely reread books, and I can't actually remember the last book that I reread. So to have reread an entire series is quite an accomplishment for me, and it has been an adventure for sure. So I have a ton of thoughts. We have a lot to get through in this video, so let's go. There are just so many little things that I'd like to talk about in this video, but if I talked about everything, this video would be hours and hours long. You don't want to watch a video that's hours and hours long, and I don't want to edit it. So I've done my best to really narrow it down to what I really want to talk about in this video. So this is still going to be pretty long. So yeah, I just have a lot of thoughts. I like to talk.
I left things unsaid, and you cannot forget how my mistakes haunt us, but do they really daunt us? Your tongue can be sharp, cut me close to the heart, but we can master the art. And the thing is that these scars are scary, but they are just some old scars. We should never be afraid of them. You and I know when we are too far apart, everything just falls apart. So I just close my eyes and dream about our kids and how they're running around. Won't you come and lay down next to me? Close your eyes and we'll be free. I'll keep my head high while
Hello friends, coming to you today live from the library parking lot. I'm here because I can't use my contacts for a little while, and the light that I use at home to light up my face is really bright, and it leaves a terrible reflection on my glasses. So this is the only place that I could get some good natural light and some privacy. I'm awkward, and I really don't like when my neighbors are listening to me film. So this is just going to be my random reading thoughts, all of the things that I was thinking when I was reading Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, all of the somewhat incomplete thoughts that I can't really make a whole section out of in the final discussion, or that I don't really have any conclusions about, just things that I was thinking and that I noticed and that I thought would be interesting to share. So some of these are somewhat conclusions about what I think is happening and things like that. Other things are just random thoughts that really have no purpose, no explanation, at least no explanation that I can think of, and are just interesting. So without further ado, these are my random reading thoughts. One of these days I'll get a car mount or something, I don't know. Guess we're just gonna deal with this awkward angle, sorry. I kind of forgot Harry wore glasses. Like, I mean, it was a big thing in the first one where he broke his glasses, Hermione fixed them with the Reparo. But after that, like, it wasn't really that much of an important detail that Harry wore glasses, but it came up somewhere again, and I was just like, out of all the things that Madame Pomfrey can fix, she can regrow whole bones, she can do everything, but she can't fix Harry's eyesight. You would think that should be easy. There should be a spell, like, because I mean, now we can get our eyesight fixed with just modern Muggle medicine, and Madame Pomfrey can't fix Harry's eyesight? It sucks. So I thought it was pretty interesting that section when Harry was saying goodbye to the Dursleys for what was presumably the last time. Like, even if they did plan on seeing each other again at some point, this would be the last time they were going to be a family. And it was interesting seeing all of their reactions. So Vernon, he like stuck his hand out to maybe shake Harry's hand, but then he like pulled it back. Like, he couldn't do it. He just couldn't break down that barrier that he's always had with Harry. And it was strange, but I guess it wasn't really that strange. And then there was Aunt Petunia, who couldn't even look at Harry because she was just beside herself with her own guilt. And so, I mean, that was a different reaction, but not really unexpected, because especially in the last book, or maybe it was the 6th book, something, Petunia got a howler, and it seemed like she
somewhat had a little bit of remorse for how she treated Harry, and because it was her sister's son. So she was just ridden with guilt, but she was also unable to overcome that and really give Harry a proper goodbye. But probably the most interesting, or maybe not, was that out of all three of them, Dudley was the one who was able to break down that wall and say a proper goodbye to Harry. And Vernon was just like, Dudley, what the hell? Harry's a waste of space. Why are you talking to him? And Dudley says to Harry, I don't think you're a waste of space, and you saved my life. And I just thought that was just the sweetest thing. Like, it's like he was really just, he's not a bad person. He was a product of his parents. He was a product of Vernon and Petunia's bigotry, and so he didn't know any better, but now he is the same age as Harry, so he's 17 now, and he actually said a proper goodbye to Harry, and I just thought it was the nicest thing. I'm glad Dudley showed character growth. Vernon and Petunia, they're just so close-minded. Progress for the sake of progress must be discouraged. I guess Vernon just lives by that. I really liked how all the information on the Horcruxes was given, because so the Horcruxes is something that required a lot of explanation in terms of the narrative. Like, it's a completely new word. The readers wouldn't know anything about what a Horcrux is, how it works, and so it required a lot of explanation. And I mean, that comes up in a lot of different books, but I felt like where a lot of books go wrong is there's just so much exposition and it's just pages and pages of explanations on these things, and it just gets like, it feels like a wall of text and just info dumping that's really difficult to get through. But I liked, so there was a whole section in this, I forget exactly where or what chapter, but it was an interesting conversation between Harry and Hermione and Scrimador, I think. And that's where all of the information about the Horcruxes was given to the reader. And so it was just really pleasant to read and to get all the information, and it helped you internalize it, and because you felt like because it felt engaging. Like, it's hard to read, just walls of text and walls of explanation or narration. It's the dialogue that really feels engaging and like you're there in the scene. And so as much as possible, I really like when information is given in dialogue. And I just thought that really set this book apart. Like, there weren't a lot of sections where there was just explanations, even though this story was a whole new world and it required a ton of explanation. Most of that was not given like through narration or just like explaining things in walls of text. It always came through the character, and that's what I think really made the story. Harry says to Scrimador, the new Minister of Magic, "Is this what you've been doing, and you expect us to cooperate with you?" Don't we all wish we could say that to some politicians? I can't remember exactly when Hermione's spew arc first came up, if it was in the third or fourth book, but after that book, I was starting to wonder what the bigger purpose of that was. Like, she kept talking about it, and it just felt like it was a little bit of a side plot that was starting to feel a little bit pointless. But when they're on their Horcrux hunt and they're dealing with Creature, this is what I think is the whole purpose. Like, I'm starting to see what the bigger purpose was of Hermione and the spew arc. So Harry decides he's going to give Creature the locket, and Creature changes dramatically when Harry gives him the locket. Creature, he was always really grumpy and just kind of had a bad attitude, but he was just so happy when Harry gives him the locket. And it's not clothing, so he's not freed, but it's a token of appreciation. And Creature really appreciates that. And I think this kind of brings to light that it's not completely black and white. It is in their culture to be servants and live in servitude, but that doesn't mean they want to be treated like vermin. You know, I mean, they have feelings, they appreciate being respected, but still that doesn't take away from the fact that it is their culture and their I don't know if you would say a biological purpose, to be servants. And I think this was an important lesson that Hermione needed to learn that became important later when dealing with the Deathly Hallows. But this lesson was that not everything has to be black or white. There is a middle ground, and that middle ground is valid. And so Hermione was looking at it very as a black or white thing. Either they are enslaved or they're free, and there is no happy in the middle that compromises with what her human value says is correct and what their culture of servitude is. And this was a lesson that she needed to learn, because later on she was having so much trouble getting on board with the Deathly Hallows because she just couldn't wrap her head around how anything like that could be real, because it wasn't logical and she didn't have all the facts. But it's kind of a lesson in accepting gray areas and looking at things in a little bit more of an open-minded way, and knowing that that you won't have all the facts about everything in life, but sometimes you just kind of have to accept those gray areas and accept what you don't know. And just because you don't understand something doesn't mean that it's not real. And that is something I think Hermione struggled with throughout the series. She was very logical, and that's not always a bad thing, but sometimes it can hold you back when you have to search for the logical, literal proof for everything, and you're just so closed off to anything else. Umbridge says that a wand would never choose a Muggleborn as its owner, which we know is false, because it does. Obviously, if wand chose Hermione, obviously wands do choose Muggleborn owners. It's just a fact. How would you even try to dispute that fact? But Umbridge just insists, and it's like one of those false facts that people are like, if I say it enough times, it'll become true. And it's like those crazy things that people say just to spread fear and pit people against each other. Like that theory that people are spreading that Covet was spread by 5G towers.
I was wrong about why Ron left in this book. So in Goblet of Fire, one of those books, Ron was having some problems with envy, and it was totally understandable because Ron is always kind of second best in his family, and Harry gets all the attention. And then I think I mentioned in that video that I thought that arc wasn't completed because it was going to come up again in a bigger way in the Deathly Hallows. And it doesn't. Ron does leave, but it's not because of envy. It's a completely different reason. Although I think it is somewhat related. Before, it was Ron's envy, but that envy was of course rooted in privilege. I think it is still rooted in privilege, but it's just a different kind of privilege. And this is a privilege that Ron has, that Harry doesn't, that Ron doesn't see as a privilege. So basically they're traveling, they're cold, they're hungry, they don't know where their next meal is coming from, they don't have all the information, they're feeling uncertain. And in general, it is somewhat mild discomfort, but Ron just cannot handle this mild discomfort. And I mean, Harry is in the same situation. He's not comfortable either. Plus, he also has the pressure of knowing that this falls to him, and Dumbledore left this project to him. But Harry is handling it a lot better than Ron because Harry doesn't have the privilege of always being comfortable. For Ron's upbringing, even if they didn't have a ton of money, they always had each other. And Ron never had to wonder about where he was sleeping or where his next meal was coming from, or that he was going to be cared for, because even if he was never the focus of his family, he was always loved by his family. And Harry never had that. And so when Ron is in this situation where he doesn't know where he's going to sleep, doesn't know where his next meal is coming from, and is feeling uncertain, he just freaks out because he's never had to deal with that in his life. And this has been Harry's life. And I just thought it's really nice to point out that throughout the entire book, throughout the entire series, it was always pointed out how
like privileged Harry was because he had money, and how underprivileged Ron was because they didn't have money. But I love that it's pointing out that privilege isn't always just about money. It's about that emotional security that comes with having a stable family. And Ron does learn that lesson, and I just think that's such a great thing to point out. So I'm looking at Ron's issues in this book and in a completely different way. Like, I don't think so. I mean, yeah, he was being a little bit unreasonable, but I can see what brought that about. And I think that's a great thing to point out. I'm getting slightly irritated with Harry. I'm also getting a little bit pink. It's getting a little bit warm in this car, and I don't want to waste gas and like turn the AC on because this car gets terrible gas mileage. But yeah, so I don't know, I'm getting a little irritated. I feel like Harry keeps telling everybody and just insisting that he can't tell them what he's looking for because Dumbledore wanted him to keep it a secret. But I mean, at this point, he's back at Hogwarts. Neville has the Dumbledore's army together, and like they all want to help. What is the point of keeping it a secret at this point? Like, just get everybody on board, get everybody helping. Like come on, Harry. You don't have to be so extreme. This whole series is a lesson in extremism, and everybody is learning to not be so extreme, and it's great. After several books of Percy being a complete douche canoe, and getting even worse throughout the later books because he was all in about Fudge, now suddenly he comes running up and apologizes and said he was wrong. I wish we knew exactly what made him change his mind. I feel like if we knew, we could parse that for ourselves and help us understand why some other people we know won't change their minds. I just wish I knew what exactly made Percy change his mind. So, Hermione. I mentioned in the last video that I did want to talk about her, and because I was just having a hard time pinning her down and her purpose in the narrative sense. Not just, I mean, like a bigger purpose or what she represents more than just, I mean, of course she's relevant because she is a character that's Harry's friend, but I mean bigger than that. What does she represent? And as I was reading, I couldn't figure it out, and I was just like thinking, I'm just gonna have to not say anything about her in my last video because I don't know what Hermione's purpose was. But I think Dumbledore said it. Dumbledore said everything in the King's Cross chapter, but I think he said what Hermione's purpose was. And that was when he said that he gave Hermione the Tales of the Beetle and the Bard because it would help slow down Harry's role. Because Dumbledore knows that Hermione is the very logical one, and in order for her to get on board with something, she requires a lot of research and thought, and Harry is more emotional. He'll go with his whims, and he'll just do things. And so Dumbledore gave Hermione the Tales of the Beetle and the Bard so that she would see the story of the Deathly Hallows, and she would slow Harry's role down. And I think her greater purpose of being Harry's friend, why J.K. Rowling gave Harry a friend like Hermione, as annoying as she was sometimes, and it was to balance Harry out, because Harry is very creative and he does things impulsively, and Hermione is the complete opposite. So if Harry didn't have someone like that in his life, things would just go off the rails really quickly, and the story would turn out probably completely differently, and it would just be a way bigger mess. Harry would probably make a bigger mess out of this whole Voldemort situation than he fixed if he didn't have Hermione there to check him and to, do the research that he should have been able to do himself, but didn't because it just isn't in his personality. So that, I think, is Hermione's greater purpose. And I think I finally understand why she does all the things she does. And things that seemed pretty annoying, like when Harry got the firebolt in The Prisoner of Azkaban, and Hermione insisted that they give the firebolt over to McGonagall so that they could test it and make sure it's not jinxed, because they figured it came from Sirius, and at the time he was just a fugitive. He could have jinxed it. And that was very annoying at the time for Harry and for kind of us the readers, because we wanted to see Harry ride the firebolt. But that was necessary. And the firebolt turned out to not be jinxed. It was okay, it didn't matter. So whether she did it or not, it have made a difference in the bigger picture. The point is, I finally see where Hermione is coming from, what she represents in terms of the narrative, and how it's because of her that the narrative really works, and why things worked out as amazingly as they did. It is thanks to Hermione checking Harry. Of course, I mean, you gotta give Harry props for his parts too, but things would have gone off the rails if it was just Harry. So, gotta give it to Hermione. It's raining now and I forgot my umbrella at home. Should I just wait? Or should I just run through the rain? Because I do want to go into the library. Because it's not raining that hard.
All the minds we lay down, it's gonna take us some time, but I won't give up, though I know it is tough. We need to break our patterns. It's better now than after we have drifted off too far. Let's tear down these walls our destiny has called. We're walking down a path, and the wind will change at last, like a song about our past. So I'll just close my eyes and dream about our kids and how they're running around. Won't you come and lay down next to me? Close your eyes and we'll be free. I can't see the point of porn.
It just amazes me how there are so many characters and so many things going on, yet it's just all wrapped up so beautifully and like nothing is forgotten. Everything is just tied up so neatly. And I don't know if is it just because I've read so many things that have felt half-baked and have not felt tied up, that I'm just so impressed that this book actually is tied up really well and it is edited well. And I'm like, wow, good writing exists. There's so much happening in terms of action, but more than that, there's just so much happening with each character's personal journey. Obviously, I haven't read every fantasy series, and it's up to interpretation whether or not I've actually even read enough to have this opinion. But here goes. There just isn't any series or standalone narrative that I have come across that is as well crafted as this series. It's just such an incredibly well-crafted world, and it feels so multi-dimensional, infinitely dimensional, actually. Harry has his things going on, like all main characters do, but there are actual other people around him that have things going on too, and they matter too. And so yeah, I guess technically all of the side characters are there in order to serve Harry's mission and the main plotline, but it doesn't feel that way. It feels like there is just a complete class of people, and it just doesn't feel like everybody is there purely to serve Harry's mission. It really feels like it's a complete world and everyone has their own thing going on, and yes, they come in and out of Harry's life in order to help Harry with what he's doing, but they still have, a life of their own. And I feel like this is what's missing in so many fantasy series. It's just, I feel like so many of the side characters just come in, and they come in for the purpose of helping the main character do whatever they're doing, and then they're just dispensable. They're just thrown away when they're no longer needed for the narrative. And it just feels, I guess it's hard to describe exactly how it feels. It just feels wrong. So, when they're no longer needed, they'll just be thrown away, or they'll disappear, or they'll die an unceremonious and irrelevant death that you can tell happened just to get rid of them. In Harry Potter, it's really hard for me to think of a character that just disappeared without us knowing what's going to happen to them or how they went on. Obviously, I'm talking about characters here besides the main characters. Characters that aren't the focus, which makes their traits and characteristics all the more interesting, because there's no space for nonsense from them. There's just no time for that. You know what I mean? Even Lockhart, who cares about him? But after his mishap with the memory charm in the Chamber of Secrets, I thought we just wouldn't hear from him again, but we do. In Half-Blood Prince, there's Lockhart again, and he is living out his days as a memory charm injured narcissist living in St. Mungo's, the hospital for magical injuries. And that's where he ended up. And was it really necessary to the narrative to let us know what happened to Lockhart? Probably not. Like, it didn't affect the narrative whether we found out what happened to Lockhart or not. But I just feel like it's just a respect to the readers to make sure that all of these loose ends are tied up and you're not left wondering. And so I just really appreciate that. I feel like it's not something that's asked for often, because a lot of times people just want to know what happens to the main characters. But I really appreciate when the world feels complete, we know what happens to everybody, and everybody matters. And even side characters that show up in seemingly small roles ended up being game changers at the end. Like Dobby. He isn't around all that much. He pops up from time to time in seemingly insignificant moments. I guess his role was kind of significant in the Chamber of Secrets when he kept trying to sabotage Harry from getting to school. And then he showed up again when he was freed from Lucius Malfoy. But besides that, he is always just kind of showing up as comic relief. But in the end, he is the one who saves Harry, Ron, and Hermione from an impossible situation by their magic standards. And he is the hero. Like, I knew that was coming because I had read the series before. But if you didn't see that coming, like, that was quite a twist. And even though we don't see that much of Dobby throughout the series, he doesn't have that much screen time. He is just such a character, and he has such a cute personality that it's just heartbreaking when he dies. To me, that's what makes for an amazing character, when you actually care about them. You care about what happens to them. And this applies to bad characters too, such as Lucius Malfoy. I can't remember exactly what happened to him after all of this, but I hope he is in Azkaban getting the Dementor's kiss. The attention to detail is just otherworldly. I feel like so many characters are so relevant in this way. I could go on forever doing deep dives in all of these characters, but just suffice to say, the characters are amazing, and I feel like it's the characters that really make this series. And I loved getting to know all of them. So, now that we've discussed all of the amazing things about the characters that I really enjoyed, I want to talk about something that throughout the series I noticed, but towards the end it got a little bit stronger, and I thought it was a little bit irksome. Not really irksome. I think it worked in a way. It was a narrative choice, and that is throughout the series the use of femininity as a plot device. What do I mean by that? So I think the most obvious description of this is with Umbridge. So Umbridge is obviously a very hateable person because of her actions. But the interesting thing is the other character traits that define her. Besides her actions, her character is described as being very hyper-feminine. She always wears pink. Her voice is described as being very high-pitched and girlish and soft and sickly sweet. Her office is filled with pink things, lace things, and the cats that adorn her walls. That could be a discussion all on its own. But I think it's pretty obvious that it's playing into the stereotypical cat lady stereotype. But of course, an explanation for this could just be that we associate femininity with niceness. So to have a super feminine woman who was a complete would make for a super interesting character. But she's also often described as being stumpy and looking like a toad, acting like a toad. And so, I don't know, I feel like the fact that the use of femininity here is like to make fun of it, to make a joke out of her, because she's hyper feminine, but she's also unattractive, which is not feminine, and she acts like, well, you know how she acts. Likewise, the good and trustworthy female characters are mostly not super feminine. Hermione is described as having bushy hair and being mildly unattractive, and she is made fun of when she tries to pretty herself up for the Yule Ball in the Goblet of Fire. Then there's McGonagall. She is described as stern. She has her hair pulled back in a tight bun all the time, and whenever she is out in the evenings, every single time she is always described as wearing a tartan dressing gown. And at one point, she's even carrying a tartan duffel bag. I mean, maybe I'm looking a little bit too much into it with the tartan print, but I would say that is a more masculine print than, say, florals or polka dots. And there's Badass Tonks. She makes a show out of changing her hair from teal to hot pink to purple and giving herself a magical pig snout. However, it's also fair to point out that during all the traveling in this book, Hermione is stuck with the feminine task of carrying that beaded handbag everywhere. And she is the one who thought to pack extra clothes for the boys when, of course, they wouldn't think to pack extra clothes. So that is one aspect of stereotypical femininity that worked out positively. So I guess I feel like the hyper-femininity is used as a way to discredit certain characters, or to make fun of them, or make fun of, or to make light of them in certain situations. Similarly, there's also the Weasley women's inexplicable dislike of Fleur Delacour. And by this, I mean Ginny and Molly. In the Half-Blood Prince, there is an entire chapter named after Ginny's rude nickname for Fleur, which is Phlegm. And maybe I missed it, but I just don't know why they hate her so much after she and Bill got engaged. I don't remember Fleur doing anything to them. Do they dislike her just because she's a part Vila, and so men are unnaturally attracted to her? Is it jealousy? Do they feel like she cast a spell on Bill and that's the only reason why he's with her? Or is it just hatred of hyperfemininity? Also, Lavender Brown. She is a joke, especially when she's dating Ron in Half-Blood Prince. Her femininity is of the obsessive and clingy type. Also, Luna Lovegood. Hyper-feminine, also a punchline. Meanwhile, we have masculine characters like Draco Malfoy and Crabbe and Goyle. Those dudes really are jokes. But Draco's masculinity is never called into question as a reason to dislike or like or trust or not trust him. Speaking of Draco, I saw on Amazon this little violin necklace, and I almost bought it for the last video because when Draco was doing whatever he was doing, and I think we're supposed to feel slightly bad for Draco, I was like, you got into this, Draco. I was gonna get out my tiny violin for Draco, but I mean, I guess this tiny violin will have to do. Whereas Umbridge, it's implied that we shouldn't trust her because she wears pink and has cats on her walls. And her actions are important, but they build on top of that cats on the wall fact that should speak for itself. See what I mean? In our final Snape update, this is what we've been waiting for. Why is Snape the way he is? What motivates him? All of the questions since we first met Snape terrorizing Harry like a bat out of hell. In my last video, I was considering the question, is Snape as much of a hero as my kid brain made him out to be? What I mean by that is, as a kid, I saw things as very black or white, as many kids do. And the consensus was that Snape turned out to be a good guy. But why? For what reason specifically was Snape deemed a good guy? And is it a good enough reason to overshadow all of the bad guy stuff he did throughout the series, leading up to his big moment in the Deathly Hallows? Basically, I think Snape was branded as a good guy in the end simply because he wasn't going against Dumbledore. He was working for Dumbledore on Dumbledore's plan, and that made him a good guy. But he was working on Dumbledore's plan for his own reasons. You could say that Snape's secondary reason for working with Dumbledore was for the good of all wizard kind and for the protection of an innocent child, Harry. But even then, his motivations were murky. I seem to have lost an important clip here, but the continuation of this thought is basically just that I think Snape's main reason for going along with Dumbledore's plan was just to appease his own guilt, because ultimately he feels guilty because of the role he played in Lily's death. And that's really all he cares about, Lily. So really that's it. It's just to appease his own guilt and, just make himself feel better. But Snape also didn't know the whole story. As far as Snape knew, Harry was going to have to die, and Dumbledore was raising him like a pig for slaughter. This was in his memories, and Harry saw it. Snape knew that Harry needed to be told at some point that he himself was the final Horcrux. And as Snape lay dying, he gave Harry his memories because it was the only way he could tell Harry this fact. Did he plan for it to work out this way? Because if he wasn't dying, I can't imagine he would have offered up all of this information about his relationship with Harry's mother. But he gave it to Harry to help him understand because he was dying anyway. So I mean, Snape kinda did hate Harry, but he was conflicted in a way. Because Harry really did remind Snape of James, who Snape didn't get along with. The important thing with that, I think, is that Snape was friends with Lily before James came into the picture, before they even met him on their way to Hogwarts. And when Snape and James did meet, they mutually disliked each other even before it became competitiveness over Lily. He actually did care for Lily as a friend, and then more later, and he disliked James for separate reasons. Therefore, it wasn't completely about two boys fighting over Lily like a piece of wagyu. The point is, this isn't just a case of Snape being a tough love, benevolent figure in Harry's life through and through, and always having Harry's best interest at heart in some covert way. There are some points that he really was just being mean, especially at moments when Harry reminded Snape of James the most. Because honestly, James is awful, and it's kind of sad that Harry is related to him. James was arrogant, and he was prejudiced against Slytherins without knowing them as individuals. He thought he was above the rules. He came from a privileged background. He was a bully himself. He never brushed his hair. And he swindled Lily into marrying him despite being a terrible person. Okay, maybe that last one is my opinion. Now I see the point of all of the discussions of Snape's and Sirius's comparisons between Harry and James, and I felt like it was the narrative trying to create distance between Harry and James, because James really wasn't a great person, but we want to believe that Harry is a good person and he's very different from James. Is this fair to Harry? Of course not. But it is an explanation for Snape's behavior. But despite his partial dislike of Harry, Snape was taken aback when Dumbledore said that Harry was going to have to die. Dumbledore didn't even tell him everything. Which brings me to Dumbledore's final explanation in the King's Cross chapter at the end of the Deathly Hallows. First of all, this whole chapter is just giving me Midnight Library vibes, which I love. Anyway, this is where we get all of Dumbledore's fully transparent explanations of all of his plans, all of his decision-making, his thought processes, and just filling in all of the gaps. We got bits and pieces throughout the books of Dumbledore's plans through different characters, but this is the first time that we are hearing the full story from his own mouth from start to finish. And it all comes together for our sake and for Harry's sake. Plus, I just love that Harry got to talk with Dumbledore again. And I love that Dumbledore showed genuine emotion, because that's something we haven't seen from him before. He's always been just so wise and stoic, and to see him just as a human for a little bit, finally, was just really nice and nostalgic before he settles into his final position as a talking portrait on the headmaster's office wall. So the question here is, does this explanation sufficiently justify all of Dumbledore's seemingly odd decisions, or would I still consider some of these things misjudgments? Here's where I stand. I think after hearing all of Dumbledore's explanations, I don't actually believe he made any misjudgments anymore. Except the part where he put the ring on his finger and it killed his hand. That was a mistake. Most of what I considered misjudgments, stemming from the Order of the Phoenix, Half-Blood Prince, and I guess not so much this book because he wasn't really there, were his withholding of information from Harry and whoever else. But when I hear from Dumbledore himself and his explanation, I started to feel like the secrecy was justified. Mostly Ron, but also Harry and Hermione, were frustrated during the Horcrux expedition because they felt like Dumbledore didn't give Harry all of the information that he needed, which was partially the truth. Harry didn't have all of the information that he needed on hand to just go and complete the mission, but he did have all of the information that he needed to lead him to the right information. So in that sense, he did have all the information that he needed. But I mean, it was a struggle, and especially Ron felt like Dumbledore just sent them on this wild goose chase. But again, it turned out that they did have all the information they needed, and they just needed to figure out how to use it. They had to discover things themselves in order to keep their heads on straight and not get ahead of themselves or go off the rails. And ultimately, I think Dumbledore's plan was a good plan, and it worked out pretty much exactly how he had planned for it. So coming back to Snape's surprise when Dumbledore told him that Harry would have to die, the final twist in the story was the reveal of that little tidbit of information that Dumbledore had not told anybody, which was that Dumbledore was 99% sure that Harry would not actually die when Voldemort used the killing curse on him again. Side note, this whole explanation was super interesting to me because I didn't understand one bit of how all this worked back when I was a kid reading this. Although I was in high school by this point, so I don't know, maybe I just wasn't paying much attention. And it just felt so poetic that the final twist was revealed in such a peaceful moment. Usually the final twist in a book is like some big spectacle, and the writer wants to make the whole thing as sensational as possible. But that wasn't necessary here. It was a really minuscule tidbit of information that single-handedly altered the meaning of everything that had come before it. It meant the struggle of finding all of the Horcruxes, how they had to figure out each one was, and then how they were going to get rid of it, especially after Griphook kidnapped the sword of Gryffindor, was leading up to Harry discovering that he was the final Horcrux. If Harry had been told about all of the Horcruxes up front, I think he would have probably stopped trying to learn and just would have focused on the task at hand, which is understandable. A lot of us are task-oriented, we just want to get the checklist done. But I feel like going through the process step by step, you keep that motivation of trying to figure things out instead of just getting into checklist mode. And then you think you're done when you've checked off everything that's on your list, and you don't even stop to think, maybe you didn't actually finish making the list. And that's what Harry needed. Same with the Deathly Hallows. If Harry had known that the story was true and knew that they definitely existed, then he might want to go get them just because he thought they would make him powerful and he could defeat Voldemort that way. But in that case, he would risk becoming arrogant like his father, who was arrogant enough just possessing one of the Hallows, the invisibility cloak. So Dumbledore planned it so that Harry would discover all of the information that he needed at precisely the right time to ensure that Harry did exactly what needed to be done while remaining in the correct headspace. I wish my brain could think that many steps ahead. What amazes me about this series is that it's a fantasy where things are happening that are not possible in the world we know, and yet it all just feels so real and so plausible. Is it the convincing characters? Is it that it's rooted in real-world locations? Is it because the characters are plagued by recognizable problems that we all deal with, from interpersonal problems to huge societal problems? I don't know what it is, but I'm here for it. Overall, it's been a different experience reading the books in such close succession. This is 7 years of Harry's life that went by in just a few weeks for me. So I had to constantly remind myself that this was developing over time, and it's not all just happening ridiculously quickly. This is one of the problems I had with the Crave series. Grace, the main character, went from not knowing any of this magical world stuff exists to being the hero and fighting for the survival of the world all within 6 months. And 4 months of that, she was literally turned into a stone. It all just felt highly implausible. Not only because the world itself is implausible, but just that a 17-year-old couldn't have had that much mental development that quickly. 17-year-olds are idiots.
I sure was an idiot when I was 17. And I, in fact, did not know everything.
So yeah, I really liked the timeline and the overall series pacing as a whole. But, I mean, keeping that in mind, I also really enjoyed reading the books in close succession because everything was just really fresh in my mind. So I could really easily connect the dots and I didn't forget anything. So that helped me, I think, notice connections that I never noticed before. That's probably why I missed a lot of things when I was younger. It took me 10 years to read the whole series the first time, and I was not about to go back and do any refreshers before I read the next book. So a lot of really interesting things, I'm sure, slipped through the cracks of my brain. I was an impatient kid. On the other hand, though, reading the series so quickly, I think made the final conclusion feel slightly less epic and final and long-awaited, because I didn't actually wait that long to get there, like I did when I read the first book in first grade and the last book in high school. But if I had to choose, I still enjoyed reading it this way because I thought all of the little details and seeing all those little connections definitely made up for the lack of long-awaitedness in the conclusion. That was a lot. So those are my thoughts on Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. I have had an amazing time rereading this series, and I probably will do it again someday. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and tell me in the comments, which nostalgic series should I reread next? That's all for today. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.
And the thing is that these scars are scary, but they are